So we are going to go into our dam panel now, another dam panel, and we're going to talk about some different dam projects throughout the West Coast. So we're going to have Howard stay on and Ken stay on, and then we're also welcoming Colleen Weiler from Whale and Dolphin Conservation and Shane Anderson from Swiftwater Films. So you already heard introductions to Howard and Ken, but I just want to quickly introduce our other two panelists. So Colleen has been the Jessica Ricos Fellow for Whale and Dolphin Conservation since 2014. Her work concentrates on identifying effective conservation strategies and protective measures for orca populations off the west coast of the US and Canada, with a focus on the endangered southern resident orca community. And Shane is a documentary film director, producer, editor, and camera operator based out of Olympia, Washington. In 2012, he formed North Fork Studios and carved out his own niche in environmental films with a focus on the rivers, forests, and wild salmon of the Pacific Northwest. Shane has produced 7 award-winning films that have aired on PBS stations across the country and have been used in numerous impact campaigns leading to positive conservation outcomes. So thank you both Colleen and Shane for joining us. So what we're going to do with this panel is each of the speakers will have about 10 minutes or so to talk about the dam that they are going to be focusing on, share screens if they want to, and then we will do a Q&A at the end. So what we thought what we'd do is just kind of start in the south at the Klamath Dams and then work our way up the coast. So I'll turn it over to Colleen initially to tell us about the Klamath Dams. Thank you, Colleen.
Thanks, Cindy. Hi, everybody. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, fantastic. I'm so excited and honored to be joining the Way of the Whales workshop today. I have had the pleasure of attending a couple in person and watching a lot on the YouTube live stream. So it's fantastic to be among such brilliant minds and talk about the long and winding and complicated path to Klamath River dam removal, which is hopefully a little bit of silver lining good news for 2020. So I'm going to share my screen because I did just put some pretty images together so we can look at the lovely Klamath River while we talk about it. Just to reiterate to you, my name is Colleen Weiler. I'm the Jessica Ricos Fellow with Whale and Dolphin Conservation, and I am down in Newport, Oregon, the unceded and traditional lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz. So I'm kind of in the halfway point between in the Southern Resident Range from up in Washington down to California. And just as a little bit of background, there we go. The Klamath River watershed is in Northern California and Southern Oregon. So it's kind of the lower end of the Southern Resident Killer Whale range, but not quite the southern boundary. And like most of the rivers in the Pacific Northwest and California, it's been heavily developed and impacted by dams. There are 4 dams in particular on the lower Klamath River that were built between 1908 and 1962. That are part of a larger system of dams used for hydropower called the Klamath Hydroelectric Project. And all but one of those were built without fish passage. So actually the 4th dam in the system is the only one that has fish passage. So even as those salmon come back and hit the very first dam, they have to be trucked around it. There's no way to get past them. And the primary use for all these dams, again, is for hydropower. The Klamath River used to be the 3rd largest salmon producing river on the West Coast after only the Columbia watershed and the Central Valley, a little bit south of the Klamath. But of course, those dams have caused significant changes to the river ecosystem, like modifying the flow of the river, raising the temperature, affecting both the leaving juveniles from the river as well as returning adult salmon, and creating pretty regular toxic algae blooms in the river. And it's had a significant impact both on the salmon coming back and the communities that depended on the river and those returning salmon, especially Klamath Basin tribes. And the Klamath is no longer a salmon powerhouse like others in the Northwest. Salmon returns have just plummeted to fractions of what they used to be. And in fact, in recent years, returns have been so low that the Yurok tribe has had to cancel their fishery for fall Chinook. So these dams block more than 400 miles of fish habitat for returning salmon. And Klamath River coho are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act, and spring Chinook have declined, estimated by as much as 98% of historic numbers. And a little bit of history of the process to dam removal on this river and why it is just so complicated. So obviously the dams have had a huge impact by themselves, but they're in combination with other issues that have been controversial in the Klamath River watershed for a long time, including use of water from the river for things like irrigation, and rights over who gets first access to that water. So following two back-to-back crises in the 2001 and 2002, first of which was shutting off water to irrigators to provide more flow for endangered and threatened fish, coho, and the Lost River sucker, caused a lot of hardship for those farmers. The year after that, 2002, they diverted water to irrigation instead, and it caused a massive die-off of salmon. It's estimated anywhere from 30,000 to 70,000 fish died because of increased water temperatures and the proliferation of a parasite that had a really significant impact in this just terrible incident that happened. And after that, it was pretty evident that a new approach was needed and something needed to happen to prevent either of those crises from happening again. And around the same time, the dams came up for relicensing, and PacifiCorp, which is the private company that owns the dams, realized that they were facing really expensive and lengthy upgrades to bring the dams up to code for present day fish passage requirements, water quality issues, and for human safety requirements. So to get out of this endless cycle of litigation and these two sides, multiple sides, river users who had been at odds for years and just kind of, going at each other and a lot of controversy and fighting each other over water use for a long time. They all came to the table together and they developed this compromise called the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement. And that laid out specific terms for river use and water rights. It included plans for habitat restoration, assurances for irrigators who depended on the river, as well as the return of specific lands to Klamath Basin tribes. So the KBRA addressed multiple issues with the Klamath on this really broad and comprehensive scale and was a multi-interest compromise that brought everybody to the table. And a year after that was developed, in a parallel process, PacifiCorp joined the agreements and officially committed to removing those 4 lower Klamath River dams. And in 2010, the final agreement was signed by PacifiCorp, the states of Oregon and California, Klamath Basin tribes, and multiple NGOs. And the federal government reviewed and did a pretty extensive environmental impact report and found support of the potential for river recovery with that plan and the habitat restoration and taking down those 4 dams. But that plan required congressional approval to finalize that transfer of land back to the tribes, provide funding for habitat restoration, and to waive review from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which will come up a little bit later when I talk about some of the stuff that happened this year. But FERC is the agency responsible for reviewing hydropower and the use of private dams for hydropower development in the US. So it's a little bit of a different process than dams that are owned and operated by the federal government. So the KBRA legislation as it was in 2010 would have gone around that process, but required Congress to approve that to happen. Legislation was introduced multiple times, and that happened to be right around the time that I started with whale and dolphin conservation. And in some of my initial conversations with a lot of folks in the Orca community, including Ken Balcom and Howard Garrett, so thanks both of you, it was really clear to the Orca folks that removing these dams would have a benefit for southern resident orcas because of the salmon recovery potential, but they weren't really being talked about in the agreement process or in the effort to pass this legislation. So WDC got involved. This was kind of my first effort with southern resident orca recovery when I joined WDC, to raise the profile of the Orca connection in this effort, and in hopes that it would kind of grease the wheels a little bit and move this legislation along, or at least help, help push it forward. But unfortunately, the plan was repeatedly blocked in Congress, and so it expired on January 1st, 2016. But luckily after that, a new agreement came together pretty quickly. Thanks mostly to the leadership of the tribes who kept pushing this forward. And they developed the Klamath Hydroelectric Settlement Agreement, and that developed the Klamath River Renewal Corporation, which was a nonprofit set up to take over the license of the dams from PacifiCorp and oversee their removal. But unfortunately, that plan was also significantly delayed. That did require it didn't take the legislative route anymore, but would go through FERC, again, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, who would have to approve applications to both transfer the license to this nonprofit that had been set up, as well as to decommission them and actually start the removal process. There were a lot of delays. There was waiting on state water quality permits, waiting on FERC to have a whole board of commissioners to be able to review this. And then this summer, they made a decision that was unexpected and kind of put everything in flux again. They approved the license transfer, but with the condition that PacifiCorp stay on as a co-licensee, which would make them liable for any expected or any cost overages that would happen with the decommissioning process, as well as liable if anything were to happen, some catastrophe with dam removal. So unfortunately, that sent PacifiCorp back to the negotiating table, but good news on that, they hammered out a new plan pretty quickly, and the states of Oregon and California stepped in to assume the role of co-licensee and take on that liability. So it shields PacifiCorp from being liable for anything and means that dam removal will move forward. And we're going to get into this with the panel discussion later, but I did just want to highlight a couple of ways that this is both similar and different to the Alwa snake, and hopefully not the Chehalis, but stakeholder engagement is key. Otherwise, you do get stuck in that endless cycle of litigation and people kind of further digging into their long-held beliefs and positions. And starting with acknowledging the impacts and committing to finding that collaborative solution really goes a long way in bringing folks to the table and getting support from enough of the river and salmon dependent communities to actually move something forward and get something happening. Tribal leadership has been essential on all of these river systems. As Susan mentioned at the very beginning of the day, they are the original stewards of the land and have deep connections to salmon and orcas and these rivers. And these dams were built in their traditional fishing areas without their consent. And they've been fighting to take them down since they went up, essentially. So focusing on supporting their efforts and working cooperatively and collaboratively with the tribes is key to restoring all of these rivers. And for the Klamath specifically, the tribes were really the first ones who went over to Scotland in 2004 and protested at the owners of the dams at the time, and have been doing annual protests at PacifiCorp headquarters until they got the agreement for the dams to come down. And they require really extensive planning. Unfortunately, because these dams have been in place for so long, they have fundamentally altered both the rivers themselves and the communities that grew up around the rivers. So planning for what happens to the ecosystem itself when these dams come down and making sure that the damage is minimal is key to actually making sure salmon have a chance to come back. And then again, planning for the community changes and impacts that happens when these dams come down. And they have different approval pathways. The Klamath went through FERC, the Elwha went through an act of Congress, the Snake River, hopefully congressional activity this year, but we'll see what happens with that. And the reason behind that is that the Klamath River dams were privately owned, so they could go through that FERC process versus ones that are publicly owned or by the federal government. And a lot of that also depends on the purpose of the dams and what they're used for. The Klamath they are only hydropower. So that is, I'm not going to say an easy fix, but it's one replacement that needs to happen for these dams to come down. A little bit complicated on other river systems where the dams are used for multiple purposes. And you have to find multiple ways to address what happens when they come down. And in the future, so it is good news that we have a new agreement. We do still need approval from Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So they do still need to approve that license transfer and decommissioning plan. Drawdowns, so starting to drain the reservoirs behind the dams is on target now to happen in 2022. It was supposed to be happening this year, but unfortunately that delay over the summer did push the process back a little bit. And then the dams will hopefully come down in 2023. And again, in the future, hopefully we've got more salmon out there in the coastal range for the southern residents. And that is what I have. Trying to power through really fast, so sorry if I took up too much time, but I'll pass it off. I think going up the river to Howard.
Yes, thanks so much, Colleen. That was perfect timing. So, Howard?
Okay, up and running. Well, I am going to talk about the Snake River dams, and I don't know of any bigger controversy. So this will be controversial, but it needs to be said. A lot of it is much like Alexandra was talking about. There's no escaping it. You really have to talk about those dams because they are so critical. They would benefit, if they were removed, it would benefit the southern resident orcas really more than any other single factor. Of course, every dam removal, every restoration, every wetland restoration is very important, but for one single act, that would do more benefit to the southern residents than really, any other single restoration effort. I didn't really think about dams at all until about 2013 when southern residents were in yet another steep decline. Reproductive failure has been the main reason for their declining population. Pregnant orcas need extra food, obviously. They're eating for two after all. And it takes a lot of calories to carry a developing baby that will be 8 feet long and 400 pounds for 18 months, and then nursing that young one for a year or so. I learned from the best authorities on orca biology, Snake River dam engineering and history, and Snake River salmon biology. I'd much rather be talking about incredible wonders of whales, but sometimes you have to say something that criticizes somebody. In the 2005 ESA endangered listing language and the Washington state listing and the 2015 NOAA recovery plan, it states, perhaps the single greatest change in food availability for resident killer whales since the 1800s has been the decline of salmon in the Columbia River Basin. And I saw the focus on the 4 Snake River dams, not the main stem dams, but just those 4 on the Snake River. Those 4 dams have reduced the quantity of Chinook salmon available to southern residents more than any other single factor, any other desecration or devastation of the environment. And I found that when you contrast the actual scientific record with the public understanding, the general understanding of the reasons for the dams, it'll drive you nuts. It's an alternate reality. We hear a lot about that. Well, this one has been going on for a long time because logistically and economically, removing those dams would be the fastest and the easiest and the least expensive way to significantly increase the food availability for Southern residents. All that's really needed is to notch the earthen berms beside each dam and let the river reclaim itself. You can leave the concrete there. That's all spelled out and illustrated in the Army Corps' own 2002 environmental impact statement. And doing that would open 5,500 miles of spawning habitat in near pristine, roadless, high altitude wilderness. The Elwha Dam removal opened about 90 miles. South Fork of the Nooksack River Dam that was removed a couple of months ago opened about 19 miles. Those are fantastic. As Colleen said, the Klamath Dams will open about 400 miles of spawning habitat. So contrast that with 5,500 miles in the upper Elwha Basin. The Snake River Basin historically produced about half of the entire Columbia salmon, which produced the most salmon of any river basin on the Pacific coast. Historically, about 1 million, as Ken mentioned, about 1 million spring summer Chinook returned to the Snake River every year. Every one of them swam in through southern resident orca habitat. Those 4 dams have nearly, maybe already, caused the extinction of those spring summer Chinook in that vast river basin and decimated fall Chinook and sockeye and steelhead and lamprey, etc. Most of the Columbia Basin salmon are now gone. And I want to show you a PDF that just arrived. This is from DamSense, but the studies are done by, well, actually it's funded in part by the BPA themselves. Let's see, the numbers are from the Columbia Research Service, which receives funding from BPA. You'll find the same numbers posted with the Fish Passage Center, also funded by the BPA. And if you look at these numbers, the spring summer Chinook, this is to compare with the 10-year average, and that's already pretty dismal, but these numbers are way below that from 2016 to 2020. And then if you go down and look at the smolt to adult ratio, as Ken mentioned, that's sort of the key statistics using pit tagged salmon. So very accurate from the ones that leave the lower dams to the ones that come back to the upper dams. You can see you need about 2% just to hold steady. That'd be right about here. But here's what's happened. 2014, 2015, 2016, it's at virtually zero. I mean, there's almost no return left. And these are the salmon that historically have been absolutely crucial for the sustenance of southern resident orcas. So decimating those salmon in turn, not only does it deprive the orcas, but it deprives those forests of marine nutrients and their ability to sequester carbon. So they play a big role in worsening global warming. And the dams deprive southern residents of their vital sustenance in the spring and early summer when other sources are not so abundant. They've turned thriving, bubbling, cool water rivers into stagnant pools emitting massive quantities of methane, also worsening global warming. The scientific record is long and comprehensive and unassailable. And the dams have done unimaginable harm to Native Americans. This was all predicted by Idaho, Oregon, and Washington salmon biologists in 1947 Before the dams were built, the Army Corps just rejected their advice, called it amateur. By 1997, all Snake River salmon were listed as threatened or endangered under the ESA. The Army Corps and the BPA have total authority to breach or not breach the dams. But 8 times over 3 decades, they have refused to comply with 3 federal judges' orders to honestly consider dam removal. They've had to admit that breaching the dams is the only way to achieve the ESA minimum goal of preventing extinction. The only way to save salmon is to breach the dams, but they always decide not to. Every time, they use a long list of misrepresentations to justify refusing to breach the dams. For instance, the BPA website says BPA receives no tax revenues or appropriations. Well, that's not exactly true. It's done with federal loan guarantees. BPA has a credit card authorized by Congress. The agencies receive multiple hundreds of millions of dollars a year for maintenance and mitigations and litigation. 17 billion over 20 years. And that pays many salaries and contracts, and it builds sprawling bureaucracies and huge political power. Those 4 dams are useless. They don't produce revenue. Barging, hydropower, irrigation, they all operate at great expense to BPA paid for by Congress. These are subsidized services to special clients. Hydropower, for example, we're told they produce enough electricity to power a city the size of Seattle. That's not true. They are run-of-the-river dams. They have to always be kept full to operate the locks, among other reasons. They only produce power during high flow in spring and in fall when the demand is low. That electricity is essentially useless, and it's already been replaced many times over. That's also why they're useless for flood control. They can't store water. They're truly deadbeat dams. But the Columbia Basin Federal Caucus, and that's the BPA Bonneville Power Authority, Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, Bureau of Reclamation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Forest Service, and 4 other agencies who get together and plan their litigations and how to deal with the ESA and lawsuits. And they all argue to keep the dams. They all use the same untruths. The agencies have been fighting to keep the dams since the 1940s. And I want to make a really important point here that's probably hard for a lot of people to understand. This isn't villainizing. It's not blaming people in these agencies. We humans tend to be shaped by our institutions, and those institutions are cultures of their own, with their own beliefs and values and goals. It's just social science 101. That's also a science, by the way. We play for our teams, and this team needs to keep those dams in place to keep the federal money rolling in. They have to repeat misinformation to justify keeping the dams, or their credit card will be taken away. It's existential. Basically, they need to keep the dams to keep their jobs. And when they're talking to the public, they're also talking to each other to show loyalty to their friends and colleagues. Their problem is they're humans. Can't blame them any more than we can blame transients for killing seals. It's what they do and what they know how to do, and they have total power to do it. They're not elected or appointed. They're hired and promoted from within their own bureaucracies according to their commitment to the goals and values of their institution. The salmon have nearly disappeared along with all their economic rationales for the dams, but their priorities have not. The Columbia Basin Federal Caucus has massive influence, shaped the thinking of more than 140 public utility districts and port authorities and chambers of commerce and local governments and media and politicians and voters in 8 states. Nobody can get elected if they oppose the BPA. Arguing with them or presenting evidence to them is like yelling in an elevator. Like Ken mentioned, it's like beating heads against the bureaucrats. Dams are also our nation's heroes. They're our icons. They win wars, they prevent floods, they create prosperity, they electrify farms. So they've got all that going for them. So what will it take to breach those dams? Power that is greater than the Columbia Basin Federal Caucus. It will take strong legislative and executive action to override the caucus. We'll need help from our new President Biden, Council on Economic Quality Chair Brenda Mallory, Interior Secretary Haaland, all of whom may be sympathetic. And we'll need help from California Representative Huffman, who is in key chairmanships of committees that would pass resolutions and would get that ball rolling. Idaho Representative Simpson is a strong voice. He's very sympathetic. And Oregon Governor Brown. We'll need many more elected officials. All the accurate science, all the public support, the protests and demonstrations definitely help build the case and the public support to breach the dams. President and legislature are the only power that can get those dams breached. So I just wanted to let you know that that's what we got to keep our focus on. And that's really who we have to talk to. We got to go right to the top to get those dams breached. And that's my introduction to the panel.
Thank you, Howard. All right, so I am just going to take a few minutes to talk about the proposed Chehalis Dam. Try to share my screen, and I just have a few slides like Colleen. I won't go into great detail on this because you can actually get a lot of great information about this from one of Shane's films about the Chehalis, which he may be talking about a little bit later. But I just want to give a little overview of what is going on and where we're at right now. So this is the Chehalis River. This is a map of the Chehalis River. If somebody isn't seeing my screen, okay, holler at me. But the Chehalis River leads out into the Pacific Ocean at Grays Harbor. And the Chehalis is one of the last free-flowing rivers on the West Coast, meaning it's not currently dammed, and we're hoping to keep it that way. It's one of the biggest producers of wild salmon. So these are not hatchery salmon. There are hatchery salmon there, but the majority of the salmon are wild, which is kind of unusual these days. It's one of the only river systems in Washington that does not have threatened or endangered salmon. That doesn't mean they're not declining. They certainly are. But at this point, they are not listed, which means there's still hope to recover them and keep them healthy. This is a river system, however, that floods frequently. Minor flooding is really common, but there have been some pretty catastrophic floods that have completely inundated the area. People have lost homes. I-5 has been closed. So they definitely do some damage. So there's certainly something that needs to be done to mitigate that. And what is being proposed is a dam. They're calling it a flood retention facility, but it's actually a dam. And this is basically what it would look like. It's huge, and there will be all kinds of impacts if this dam is built. There would be impacts to salmon from habitat destruction where the dam is going in. There would be increased water temperature behind the dam, which would exacerbate the effects of climate change. There would be impacts to tribal culture and treaty rights. The two tribes in the area, the Chehalis and the Quinault, have both expressed their opposition to this project because of the impacts to their tribes and their culture. And of course, there would be impacts to southern resident orcas because they feed on those salmon. So we do know that southern resident orcas feed off Grays Harbor. There is satellite tagging data that shows that. And in addition to that, NOAA and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife put together a priority Chinook stocks report for southern residents. And it basically weighed the importance of different runs on southern resident orcas. And what you see outlined here in red is Washington Coast spring and fall runs, which the Chehalis is part of. And those ranked 3.69 out of 5. So we know that those are important runs to them, and we know that they're feeding on them. So that is another one of the big concerns. Obviously, we care about the people in the area who have had their homes flooded and have lost their homes and properties. The dam would actually not protect all of those people. It would only protect a small portion of those people. Mostly it would protect the I-5 corridor, so the businesses along that area. Most of the people in the Chehalis Basin would not benefit from a dam. So there needs to be something else to happen that will not damage the salmon or the tribes or the orcas, and that will actually help the people who live in the basin. So where are we at right now? This is a two-part process. The state and the federal are both involved. So there needs to be permission from both. And there were draft environmental impact statements from both, and they did take public comment, which are both done now. And what has happened since then is that May 20th, after the state process was done, the Chehalis Basin Board voted to explore other options for flood reduction and mitigation. And this was based on the fact that the tribes had come out in opposition, and there was a huge public component that was opposed to the dam as well. And so they voted to start exploring other options. Also, on July 22nd, Governor Inslee sent letters to both the board and Departments of Ecology and Fish and Wildlife, and he directed them to pause this EIS process for the remainder of the year and work with the local tribes to develop some on-dam alternatives. So that is happening right now. These local actions alternatives are being developed. They will be completed in March, and then it's up to the state to decide what to do with them. So just anticipating there might be a question later about what can we do. The most important thing that you can do is to write letters to Governor Inslee and to your local legislators, asking them when these local actions alternatives are done in March to support them over a dam. So that would be the most important thing to do right now, is just reach out to them and tell them that you care about this, that this is not just a Chehalis Basin issue, that it affects salmon, it affects orcas, it affects all of us, and that we want them to support the local actions over the dam. And I will stop there. All right, and then Ken, are you still there? Did you have anything else that you wanted to say about the ELWA, or did you already kind of say whatever you wanted to?
No, all I want to say about the ELWA, if you hear me, got me, is it's the good story. It's I was just amazed that there are naysayers and propagandists employed by somebody that wants to keep the dam stuff going. This is a good story. It's happening, and celebrate it. I'm just thrilled to be even alive for part of it. So let's celebrate it. Let's not let naysayers point to misinformation that leads you to believe that, oh, well, this is hopeless, it isn't going to work. No, it works. And that's what we want to demonstrate and celebrate.
Great, thank you, Ken. All right, so next I'm going to turn it over to Shane Anderson, who is going to talk about dam projects from a filmmaker's perspective and talk to you about some of the great films that he has done about these projects. Thanks, Shane.
Great, thanks, Cindy, and thanks everybody for having me. I've been fortunate enough to be able to document rivers and salmon and forest issues here in the Pacific Northwest for the past decade. I live in Olympia, Washington. And the last feature film I did was more to highlight a current dam proposal on the Chehalis River that Cindy just talked about. So if you are interested in learning more about it, it is currently on Amazon Prime, and it will be on PBS National starting next month, I believe. And I'm currently in production right now on the official dam removal documentary for the Klamath River that I started last June. So that will be in production for the first part for the next 5 years, and then I'll document a few years after that. I think Cindy was going to add a link of a short film I just produced with American Rivers and the Yurok tribe down there that kind of highlights the current status, what's going on down there. Fortunate to be able to document the Nooksack Dam removal on the Middle Fork Nooksack this summer, and hopefully I can do a screen share and at the end of my talk here and show some footage that's never been seen before of the dam blowing up. That was really exciting. Can't wait to see the same thing happen on the Klamath and that 400 miles of habitat opened up. Spent a lot of time in the Elwha headwaters documenting riverscapes up there and the comeback of the wild summer steelhead, the bull trout, and we did see some Chinook up there in the headwaters. Only a handful, but even through electrofishing, we saw juveniles. So they are making it happen up there. It's just taking a little longer than the lower basin because they got to make it through the Grand Canyon. There's some velocity barriers in there, but they're getting there. So during the production of Chehalis, one of the stories that really inspired me to kind of do a little more deep dive was the plight of spring Chinook salmon. So last year I started a film called The Lost Salmon about the plight of spring Chinook salmon. Took me to San Juan Island where I got to film The Southern Residents, which was one of the most amazing experiences of my life because I just happened to be there at sunset with Cindy and a bunch of other folks for the Super Pod for the last half hour of daylight. So the spring Chinook salmon, historically the most revered salmon on the West Coast and the most abundant from the San Joaquin Valley all the way up into Canada. Right now, they're basically on a fast track for extinction. And a few years ago, a good friend of mine, Dr. Mike Miller down at UC Davis, is a genetic scientist, discovered a gene called the GREB1L gene. And it's an ancient gene that's evolved over 15 million years with these fish. And basically what it is, it's a run timing gene. So spring Chinook have a certain gene and fall Chinook have a certain gene. And a fall Chinook cannot become a spring Chinook, but a spring Chinook can spawn with a fall Chinook and create a hybrid. And we're seeing that a lot right now due to climate impacts and overlapping spawn timing. So that's presenting a major trouble, but also dams have done the most damage to spring Chinook because these were the fish that traveled high up into the systems. They would enter early, often in February through June. And these are where people put dams starting back in the turn of the century. So, the spring Chinook in the San Joaquin Valley of California are extinct. They're down to really small populations in the Sacramento. Up into the Klamath, they've been extirpated above the dams up there, which is going to present a major challenge in recovery of spring Chinook since the last stronghold in the Klamath systems, the Salmon River, where only about 120 showed up a few years ago. And those spring Chinook salmon in the Salmon River and the Klamath are genetically adapted to that river. So somehow we're going to have to figure out how to get spring Chinook up into the upper Klamath. And it's going to take some serious science. The Oregon coast used to be abundant spring Chinook stronghold, more so than fall Chinook. They're largely extinct. Up into the Chehalis River, 1948, the Chehalis tribe harvested 4,200 spring Chinook in the Chehalis River. Last year, less than 500 fish, and probably a good portion of those were miscounted as fall Chinook or hybridized to what is called a heterozygote. So we're losing these spring Chinook genes, and these are the fish, these are the Chinook that get big. These are the fish that we need to recover, and these are the fish that through dam removal, we will be able to recover. But another big problem with the recovery of these spring Chinook are the mixed stock fisheries out in the ocean, because they indiscriminately catch fish that migrate out from the Washington coast, from the Columbia, all the way up into Southeast Alaska, where they're picked off in mixed stock fisheries and then sold as wild caught sustainable salmon in Costco and farmers markets and all over the place. So that is a huge problem. And hopefully through some of this new genetic work, we can get samples up there and kind of try to figure out what percentage of that bycatch are these spring Chinook populations, because we're talking South Umpqua, 27 fish a few years ago were counted. I do snorkel surveys on the Hood Canal streams. I'm lucky to see 1 or 2 a summer. They were extinct from Nisqually in 1955, Puyallup from the Mud Mountain Dam. So we got a lot of work to do to recover springers, and management agencies have typically, before this genetic study came out and this genetic science, managed all Chinook under the umbrella of one species. And now we know that that's a fast track for extinction. So thankfully, these dam removals are gaining momentum. I'm so optimistic for the snake. It is going to be the largest restoration, and as well as the Klamath. And the Klamath fight has been one that I feel like the whole snake campaigns really need to lean on to see how they did it, because it was some of the most influential collaboration that I've seen in doing this work with tribes and NGOs and bureaucrats all working toward a common goal. And can't wait to tell that story. So I've never done a video screen share before, but I'm gonna try here, because I'm gonna show you some of this Nooksack footage. It's about 2.5 minutes. All right, here we go. Here's the
Definitely.
Middle Fork Nooksack. No one's seen this before, and nobody's gonna see it because it's going to international broadcast in about 2 years. So for your eyes only.
About a year ago, before that was actually quite done, but they were getting ready for it. We were in the neighborhood, so I walked down that road. I hoped to get some good pictures, but they headed me off and said, well, no, you have to get permission to do that. So you got it. You nailed it. You were right in there to see it and show it to us, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. And next week I'll be releasing, we have a 5-month time lapse we did up there. It was, the first time we set up this solar panel time lapse rig for 5 months. So it's about a 2.5-minute video just of the whole thing. So.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to see it.
Thanks.
Yeah, that was dramatic. Can I ask a question?
You bet.
Yeah, why was it considered necessary to remove the concrete structures if you had a bypass? Was it to change the gradient so it was more favorable to recovery?
Yeah, I think it had to do with the gradient, and also part of the decommissioning involved changing a water diversion system for the city of Bellingham. That's how they were able to collaborate, which they put an intake, I think it's about 400 yards up above the dam. So they needed that one part of the dam to stay with this tunnel to divert water. And yeah, I think that's basically the reason, between the gradient and the water inlet for the city of Bellingham.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things the LWA taught us is that, the actual removal is only part of the cost. It's dealing with the other stakeholders in their wants and needs from the project. And, that's, oh my God, start my video. Oh, host has asked me to start my video. Yeah, I'm sitting here talking. Well, anyway, so yeah, the actual explosion, it's fabulous. I mean, it's demonstrative of what needs to be done, but it brings up the point that there are a lot of collateral expenses here that have to be met in terms of agreements. That's where the bulk of the costs actually come in these removal projects.
Absolutely. And, I think that is the future of dam removals, is finding that collaboration with municipalities and agencies. And that's what the KBHA and the Klamath did originally before that kind of fell apart, and to get the Klamath dam removal going. And it'll be interesting to see what happens with the snake here coming up. I'm really excited.
Well, I've only read about the stuff that's happening on the East Coast with Penobscot and other rivers that have been restored, and it was the environmental organizations stepped up with the financial wherewithal, backing, and their political backing to collaborate with the power companies, the irrigators, whoever's necessary to meet their needs too. It's a people thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was remarkable, wonderful work. Thank you.
Well, all right. Are you guys ready for questions?
Sure.
Perfect.
Away.
So it looks like the first question concerning dams on here is going to be for Colleen. It says, were there any accords signed by tribes with the Klamath River dams like the Columbia Fish Accords? The Columbia Accords prohibit those who sign on and receive money from supporting Lower Snake River Dam breaching.
None that I have ever come across, so not to my knowledge. And as I mentioned, the Klamath River tribes have really been the leaders on that particular issue, and kind of jump-started everything with protesting and drawing a lot of attention to the dams and the need to take them down in the mid-2000s, and have really been, they do marches and salmon festivals and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, they have not been silent on the issue at all. They haven't been forced into kind of withholding their opinion. So they've been right in the middle of it.
Nice. And for Howard, do you happen to know if Jim Waddell and DamSense have any current initiatives to remove the Snake River dams?
Boy.
I don't know of any initiatives, but just providing information. That's all. I think that this is what needs to be done. I mean, there really should be a contingent that goes to political leaders when we have a new administration. Then I think it's, possible there will be receptive ears at least. And in fact, that was almost the case in 2014, 2015. There were the right contacts and connections to the Council on Economic Quality and, right to President Obama. And I think, they were receptive to the idea. They understood the science, they understood the need, and they understood the opposition. But the political opposition within mainly Washington, but Idaho, Oregon, the region, was too much for politicians. They needed the sign-ons from the local politicians, and really it comes down to voter pressure. They would have all been diselected if any of them had said, let's breach the dam. So you got to understand that.
Yeah, I think Jim Waddell is working on a kind of a shovel-ready proposal for Biden and the new administration to consider. It's a necessary thing. It would provide jobs. It would provide income to the region. And the main thing is going to be the sell to the stakeholder people that think that they have compensation, warranted on their behalf. But basically, things could change quickly. And I know Jim's a real bearcat on this stuff. He isn't going to give up. And he's the most knowledgeable person I've met on the subject. So I think for him to prepare from an engineer standpoint, a shovel-ready project that, it's just peanuts compared to the money that has to be put back into our national economy in various ways. and restoring environments ought to be a priority. That's all.
So to follow up on Lower Snake River, there's a question in here. It says, whatever happened with the task force's recommendation for stakeholders meeting? I know the meetings occurred, but did they have any impact?
I don't think so. They were a very good way to survey opinions. Although a lot of the very negative opinions sort of seeped into the editorializing in the report. So overall, the report didn't go for anywhere. It did, it left us at the start, basically, or worse.
Yeah. Or worse.
All right, and for Cindy, we're circling back to the Chehalis. Someone wants to know, are there any hints about what the alternatives for the Chehalis are? And are we assuming that they will be positive solutions?
That is a really good question. We don't really know what those local actions alternatives are going to look like yet. They do have a technical advisory group and an implementation advisory group that are working on that. It's a really, really tight timeline. They're having to get this done pretty quickly and get it done by March. But the idea is that they would be local actions that would be non-dam alternatives. So just in that, in and of itself, is going to be positive. The other positive things to think about with them is that, first of all, the price tag is going to be a lot less for the state budget than a dam would be. And as I mentioned earlier, there's only a small percentage of people who would be protected by a dam, whereas local actions would be spread out more throughout the basin rather than just the I-5 corridor for the most part. It would mean local jobs. If they were to build a dam, they would certainly have to contract out for that, and this would be local jobs. And they could begin immediately rather than having to wait years for a dam to be built. So those are all of the positives that would come out of that. And again, we don't know exactly what they're going to look like yet, but we're just going to have to wait and see what happens in March. I don't know, Shane, if you have any more information than that you would like to add. I know you're really involved in that issue as well.
Yeah, I mean, flood, it's a flood control dam. Flooding is like the #1 natural disaster in America. And one of the reasons it's the #1 disaster is because of where we build. And unfortunately, in the Chehalis, a lot of the land use decisions, well, all over Washington, the land use decisions are made by local governments and local municipalities. And I-5 was put right through the floodplain when it was built in the 60s, and subsequently they allowed development all around it. And that's, there's a lot of speculation that development is what's been the driving force behind this dam, is to protect that investment, because a lot of that property is owned by Port of Chehalis, the Port of Centralia, the city of Chehalis. That they lease those out to those big box stores. If you look at the damage up above it, yeah, there was some catastrophic damage, but you got to look at the root. And I'm talking about 2007 flood, kind of, that was the instigator for this dam. And basically what happened is there was over 1,700 landslides on clear-cut lands in the headwaters that caused natural dams in the river after 20 inches of rain. And when those natural dams broke with all that debris, it basically created a flash flood system. So places that had never flooded before had logs in their house. And but it's unlikely that, it's very unlikely we're going to see that kind of an event, a mass wasting event like that kind of flash flood happen. So kind of went on a tangent there, but back to the local actions. It's a combination of moving people out of harm's way, creating greenways, natural flow corridors, and then river restoration that can help slow the water, starting all the way up into the high tributaries all throughout the basin. So the cumulative effects would essentially spread the water out over a greater space, rather than right now where a lot of the wood's gone from rivers. So that velocity of water is just shooting out like a fire hose in every tributary, and the main channel itself that's become incised. And that incision creates more power from the water and therefore more damage to communities. So spreading out that power of water is one of the alternatives, and just getting people out of harm's way is the best thing we could possibly do.
So to follow up with the Chehalis, there are a few questions on here. I noticed in the chat, it's a little higher up now. I think Cindy, you posted it when the video was playing. There is a link for, it's called Chehalis, a watershed moment. And that's the video we were referring to that Shane did, in case anyone wants to go back and look at that. But the other question was, is there a website or somewhere else where folks can continue to tune in about what's going on with this process before all the preliminary results are released in March?
Yes, there is a website. There's an alliance called the Chehalis River Alliance. Shane is part of that. Orca Network's part of that. So if you go to ChehalisRiverAlliance.org, you can read a lot more information about that. And we will also be putting out an action alert once those local actions are released. Again, just getting people to comment to their legislators and to Governor Inslee, really urging them to support those local actions. So stay tuned for that. We'll put things on our Facebook page. And again, you can check out the Chehalis River Alliance website as well.
All right, and Shane, this one is for you. It says, you mentioned genetic testing of bycatch Chinook. Have you approached Northwest Food Strategies to see if they can dovetail with this effort?
I have not, but I'm going to write that down right now. And Northwest Food Strategies, I appreciate that. Yeah, we're just kind of starting to talk about how that study would go, and getting the samples is going to be the hardest part up there, because as Ken had mentioned in his presentation, there's only one conservationist on the whole board of the Pacific Salmon Treaty stuff, and they don't like to hand out their genetic samples very easily. And, you know, if we found a large number of our coastal spring Chinook in that bycatch, that could easily shut down that whole fishery. And I'll add a caveat. I do think that we really need to look at listing spring Chinook under the ESA as endangered across the whole range, because they're now that we know they're genetically distinct from fall Chinook, they deserve their own listing. So there is efforts in the Klamath to do that. The Karuk tribe's leading an effort down there, and there was a petition filed on the Rogue and a petition filed on the Oregon coast. So I think if we could see more ESA protections and recovery plans specifically directed at spring Chinook, I think that would help dramatically.
Definitely. Just to kind of circle back to what you said before you shared the video as well. So that was kind of something you were sharing, especially with us. There were a couple questions about where to see the film again or how to get the time lapse. But if I heard you correctly, you said you're kind of in the process of currently putting that together. Is that right?
Yes, the time lapse I'll be putting out next week, swiftwaterfilms.com on my website. And that clip I can't share because it's going to go to international broadcast. I just wanted to share it with people for the day. So,
well, thanks for doing that for sure.
I know some of the footage is I gave to American Rivers for a short video they're doing that will be released in February.
Awesome. All right, so there are actually a couple. I think I'm going to open it to the whole panel because some of these questions are really good. It's not particularly around any specific dam, but one of them says, what is the timeline for breaching a dam from the green light all the way through to completion? And how many fields of expertise are involved in that process? So whoever wants to answer that.
Yeah, good question. I really meant to look up when the EIS was prepared by National Park Service, but at least 10 or 15 years prior to 2011 when the actual shovel work began. Probably 20 years. Yeah, time. Like, what are years? I mean, they just go by. Yeah, last year just went. So anyway, it was a long time. It's not immediate.
Yeah, I'll add to that it is a long time. And, you know, on the examples that we have for the Elwha, it was decades. For the Klamath, it's going to end up being decades. And it, I think, varies based on the dam and what it's used for and what would need to be replaced, as well as the river system and how much planning needs to happen to actually take the dam down. Like Klamath and the Elwha both have, you know, hundreds of thousands of tons of sediment behind them, and they have to figure out what to do with that sediment, if they're letting it wash out, if it needs to be dredged. So there's just so many technical details to go into it. And the plan for the Klamath River is like 3,000 pages long to dig into all of the different processes that go into it. So it varies by river. It's never, I think, the same, but it is always a really extensive planning process.
Bonnie Gretz mentioned in the comments a book on the history of the Elwha, River of Destiny by Adamir and Fish, appropriately. Anyway, it's about, you know, how they were built, and I assume how they were unbuilt. So that might answer, at least for the Elwha, but it's like, you know, what does it take to, you know, to carve a walking stick? You know, it just depends on what you're doing. You know, I mean, there's just a lot of different variables with each one, and so much of it is getting political consensus to start, to get it going. And that's what needs to be done with the Snake. Looks like it's pretty well been done with the Klamath, and now it's just getting it done, and the funding needs to be lined up. It took, what, 20 years? I don't know the exact span, but from the first, you know, inclinations and movements to remove the Elwha dams before they were actually done. And the funding came out of the 2009 economic stimulus funding that was sort of spread out over shovel-ready projects for the good of the economy. So that was just fortuitous that the funding arrived. Otherwise, you know, it could have been much longer before they were done.
Yeah, I think it all depends on the size of the dam. I mean, I know Nooksack probably took about 15 years, and again, there was a lot of stakeholders that came together to fund the removal, including Paul Allen Foundation, and then the City of Bellingham, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. I mean, it was a bunch of people and foundations, RLF, Resource Legacy Fund, all coming together to, you know, chip into the pot. And yeah, and I think it depends if it's a private dam or a federal dam, you know, dealing with the FERC process. And yeah.
I think you can also see it as, if you look at, you know, big picture, it's a shift of philosophical focus to an ecosystem priority. If you want the ecosystem to function well, what will it take? And then it becomes more clear what you need to do, and that the dams, in most cases, many cases, need to come down.
Yeah. I think, you know, you got to deal with the stakeholders here. And in the case of the Snake, you got the irrigation people. That ought to be fairly easy. You have the transportation people and the farmers. That's going to be a little more challenging. And you have the stubborn power people, electricity people. But that one, I mean, ratepayers can speak up to that. We're paying to kill fish.
Yeah.
Destroy ecosystems. Why do we do that?
Paying higher rates for that power than for, you know, market power.
Yeah. And then to have Congress bail them out once they figure out that they're not making any money anymore. I mean, that's stupid, because they're losing it hand over fist. Anyway.
That one's not so hard. Yeah, it's the transport of grain from Idaho down the Columbia, basically, that has to be solved.
Yeah.
It can't be that hard.
No, but I mean, that can be a focus of an environmental group, is you know, let's deal with that one. Let's work real hard on the transportation agriculture part. Let's work another group can just work on the irrigation thing, you know. I mean, that's cheap in comparison. And then work on the politics of the BPA situation. Just, we're all ratepayers. We're all supporting that, and we're taxpayers. We don't want to do that.
Right. Mike Simpson in Idaho used a little creative imagination and suggested there could be a farmers co-op that would build a railway so they could control the rates and the timing and make it suit their needs. And, you know, that could be done. I mean, the railway is there, but it needs to be, you know, enhanced a little bit. And the ownership and control needs to be so that the farmers, you know, aren't going to get overcharged.
Yep.
I'll jump in here and follow up on those excellent points by Howard and Ken and say that this is where Congress really can play a role. Maybe not necessarily in making the decision to take down the Snake River dams, but in funding some of those projects like rail or a farmers co-op or you know, alternative energy, and providing an infrastructure package that can help provide money to make all of that happen and replace those services. So it's a, you know, a parallel process that really needs to happen.
Yeah, I wish I had more confidence in that process because, you know, we provided all kinds of facts for 45 years about the status of the Southern residents and where they go and what they need and, you know, like, and then you come out with, well, we're going to stop whale watching. That's absurd. I mean, it'll benefit agencies that get increased funding as a result of, you know, some sort of measure to help the whales, but it doesn't help the whales. I mean, what we have to do is give them the fish. And that's where I lost my faith in the legislative part of this thing, is that it's just completely bonkers. It's a different game. It's not like, you know, basically Alex was saying that, you know, dealing with that is a whole different category. I want to be in phase one here where I'm just taking pictures of whales and counting them up. I don't want to have to deal with, oh, well, you guys misunderstood what needs to be done. Anyway, I tend to get cynical and critical, so don't let me do that.
You got a good story there, Ken, and you're telling it well.
Well, yeah. I mean, if the example is going to be, okay, the whales just bought a ranch. Well, okay, that's what they did. And that's where the lesson is, you know, start there.
Well, thanks to all 5 of you for weighing in. I know that none of you are sitting on the panel today that might have the information, but I figured I would ask since there are a couple questions in the chat kind of revolving around this. One of them is, to what extent do you think salmon habitat restoration in Skagit Valley floodplains can positively impact southern resident killer whales? And that's for anybody.
Yeah.
I would say that's one of the #1 bottlenecks for the Skagit River is the loss of rearing habitat in the floodplain being diked off. I think it would be true. I think that's one of the only ways we're going to see the Skagit recover to its full potential, is getting that rearing habitat back. And that's stuff a lot of people overlook. You know, the dams are the obvious thing that block the rivers, but a lot of people overlook the estuaries and the rearing habitat for the juveniles. And that's fully as important as spawning habitat.
Sure. And so I live here in Skagit Valley, and I guess to kind of weigh in on that, there has been a restoration project that was done recently out at Lekwa Island. And they're also looking to take the Skagit Wildlife Management Area, also known as Wiley Slough. There's a big yellow sign up there for, you know, projected land use proposal going on right now. So if people are looking for things to actively get involved with and possibly make a difference, one of the intended uses for that is to take that land area and, you know, bring some of that back for salmon rearing habitat. So it would be great for folks to just do a quick Google search. I don't really have anything in my back pocket right now to kind of be able to pinpoint you toward. But that is something that I think is actively going on. That sign has been up for the last couple of weeks, and I've been meaning to look into it myself as someplace that I frequent quite often. So, you know, there are things coming up that, you know, if people weigh in, you have the ability to change the outcome and possibly, you know, gain us some of that land back for salmon rearing, for sure. And so the other one that some folks had questions on, it says, what's the status of the Duwamish River cleanup and possible takedown of that dam, if anyone knows?
Yeah. There are so many. There's 750,000 dams in America. You know, each one of them has an ecological story to rectify. I'm sure. I don't know about, you know, there are dams all over the place. The one that I've picked to champion is one that's happening, and I just don't want to hear the naysayers get away with bullshit. Tell them it's working. This is what you do. Don't let them naysay it.
Unfortunately, a lot of the, you know, one of the big obstacles to dam removal and the naysayers is it's just rooted in ideology. It's not rooted in practicality all the time. So, you know, it's this manifest destiny, how the West was won, progress, like getting people to change the vision of what that means. What does manifesting destiny mean, and what is the future of progress? I mean, that's where we really need to kind of get to the root of the ideologies and show what a restoration economy can do to some of these communities as well, because that could be the next big thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
I'll recommend a couple of our partner groups for information on the Duwamish, because I think, you know, I'm certainly not an expert on them, but we do work with groups that are. Puget Soundkeeper, look into for maybe water quality and Duwamish River cleanup, and American Rivers for any dam removal efforts. Pretty much anywhere they would have a good source of information on that.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, you guys, for sake of wrapping it up and trying to end us on time, I think we're probably going to call the dam panel done. I appreciate all of your time and everything that you shared. I'm sure everybody I've seen the chat has been very appreciative of everything you have shared as well. So with that being said, I have a couple quick slides I'm going to go through really quick, and then I'm either going to have possibly Susan hop on to just let everybody know what's coming up next and to say thanks, or maybe Howie, you'll close for us. So thank you guys. Thank you, Shane, Ken, Colleen, Cindy, Howie.
All right.
Well, okay then.
All
I
right.
don't have any prepared remarks, but this has been informative, edifying, and I think we all learned a lot. So it's a matter of sort of retaining it and recording it, and there will be recording for all participants. And Valerie Yates asked about the tips and comments and ideas in the comments in the chat. Can that be automatically saved, you know, to anything, or do we have to just copy paste it? Is that possible? I don't know. Because it does seem a shame.
Can't save that?
Yeah,
We'll get a copy of that.
okay, we'll get a copy of the chat. So yeah, there's just a lot of great value here. Information on specifics and philosophical ideas. I could go over so many of the talks and ideas that were given today, and we need to. I mean, we should refresh on all this. It's sort of remember it better. But it was really a great day. I'm so glad so many, and we retained a lot of people too who stayed with it for quite some time throughout. You know, and now over 200 to 240 and more at some time. So this is the numbers that we used to get when we had it in an actual location. And we didn't have to have all the treats and all the sign-ins and all the lanyards and all the sandwich board signs and all the rest that go with that. So there's an upside to this. So we really appreciate everybody joining in, learning, hearing, participating, suggesting, asking questions. This has been a real participatory experience. So thanks to all who joined in. And now Susan has a thing or two. Oh, Amanda's going to do the slideshow.
Oh, yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna go through this quickly. You all already saw the video we played at the very beginning to kind of open our Ways of Wales workshop. But for those of you joining us from farther reaches that might not be aware, we have got our mission statement at the top here. Orca Network is dedicated to raising awareness of the whales of the Pacific Northwest and the importance of providing them healthy and safe habitats. And under our nonprofit are our projects, which are, kind of nested firmly under there. It's kind of important to note that these are not standalone. They are in fact nested under Orca Network, but we've got our whale sighting network, Langley Whale Center, the Tokate Free Me 50 Years a Slave campaign, and the Central Puget Sound Marine Mammal Stranding Network, as well as education, outreach, and other advocacy efforts. So our whale sighting network is just a unique and effective way that we involve the communities in local land-based data collection. And we are assisting researchers with tracking the movements of the whales of the Pacific Northwest. So it's a big citizen science initiative. Anybody can report, anybody can benefit from seeing those reports. Most of that happens on our Facebook page on social media, so just Orca Network. We also have our Langley Whale Center that's been open since March of 2014. It's kind of our physical presence on Whidbey Island in Langley, and it provides that education and outreach. We saw over 30,000 visitors in 2019. And our Central Puget Sound Marine Mammal Stranding Network is a partnership with NOAA Fisheries. We have trained staff, volunteers that respond to and examine live and dead marine mammal strandings in Island, Skagit, and North Snohomish counties, as well as also doing necropsies and producing vital information that can tell us about the ecosystem in a larger format. And so we wanted to extend a great big thank you to our docents, our volunteers, and anyone who's contributed sightings to the network. So our Free Me campaign since 1995, Orca Network has campaigned to retire Tokate to her home waters in the Salish Sea. Efforts continue, as well as education about the harmful effects of keeping orcas in captivity. Our education, outreach, and advocacy efforts, you guys are taking part in that just by being on this webinar with us here. That's one of our largest annual events. In January, you can see in April, we usually do a Welcome the Whales Festival and Parade in person. I think it's to be determined whether or not that will be going virtual this year. And in August, we do a commemoration of the orcas that were captured in Penn Cove, including Tokate. So a great big thank you to staff, our partner groups, and all of our advocacy coalitions that we, have been working hand in hand with and that make these things possible. Just kind of a wrap on 2020. You guys can see some of the stats. We had 7,070 whale reports collected on 11 species or ecotypes from 1,450 community members. And all of that information was sent to 15,500 people. So that network is extensive and growing. I think if I'm saying this correctly, that is the most we've ever had as far as our whale reports go. Our social media presence had definitely jumped this year, especially with COVID. So we had a reach of about 475,000 people, which is amazing. 93% of our funds were dedicated to projects, education, advocacy, and outreach. Our Langley Whale Center, we were open a little bit under different guidelines once COVID-19 closures went into effect. So for about 5 months, we were open. We saw 7,600 visitors, which was a lot less than the 30,000 I mentioned in 2019. But we were able to transition our youth events online. So we had 11 of those, and we reached 390 kids through kind of that virtual outreach. And then the days that we were open in the center, we had kids come in as well. So if you'll notice, we've had a lot of hours training our volunteers. We still participated in 87 events last year that reached over 20,000 people. We had to cancel 40 of our in-person events. And then there were 48 advocacy meetings attended and 30 letters sent. So on a whole, even though 2020 was a very different year, I think we were all able to figure out a new way forward and just keep on keeping on. So for 2021, we've had a lot of questions about our annual Baja trip. It's been postponed and we don't have dates for 2022 yet, but those folks that might be interested, if you will reach out to us via email or Facebook Messenger, we can put you down on a list so that when we do have some information to share in the future, you will be the first to know. As far as the Whale Center is concerned, right now we're closed until further notice. We are accepting private tours and kind of private groups for shopping. So if you would call the number on the screen to schedule, that would be the easiest way to participate in that. And if you would rather shop online, we've got a lot of our merchandise up on the web shop. So that's at shop.orcanetwork.org. So finally, we do want to thank you for attending the Ways of Whales workshop with us today. We are going to switch gears here and go to a virtual happy hour. Since this is a webinar and only those that are panelists are able to interact and have their video on, we do have a separate link that we're going to post in the chat. That will be a Zoom meeting instead, and that will enable everybody to have their cameras on, chat with us for a little bit. So we hope that you're going to join us. We definitely want to extend a big thank you to all of our presenters today, the panel, all of our partners, the staff and volunteers that have been working on and off the Zoom to make our workshop a success. And I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Susan so she can tell everybody the same.
Okay, well, I'm glad you and Howie said most of it, and I just want to thank everyone for coming, but I really want to thank all of our staff who made this possible and the excellent presenters. It was doing it virtually this year was different for us, even though we've done all our other events, including a parade virtually. I think we can safely say we can pretty much do everything we do virtually and keep going for however long this pandemic goes on. And so we just really thank everyone for being willing to join us this way and be a part of it. I wanted to mention on the graphic that was just shown, a lot of those are preliminary numbers or estimates. I know just orca sightings, we had 6,300. And I know we underrepresented some of the necropsies. I think we had done 11. So we're going to be updating that to once we get all of our stats in. But creating that graphic made me realize how much happens under the umbrella of Orca Network. And it blows my mind that we can do so much for a small organization. And a lot of that is due to, very talented and dedicated staff and board members, but also to all the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who have helped us in so many ways by sharing whale reports or helping at events when we have those live, helping at the Whale Center, the Stranding Network. It's just been incredible, and seeing all that dedication from people. And I mean, today it was reflected as well in the chat. Everyone's asking how they can help, and that to me is the most promising thing, is that there are so many people of all ages from all walks of life who want to help. And we're going to continue to find ways for people to help and continue educating and outreaching, even if it's virtually. And the silver lining to that is we can reach a lot more people. Our youth activities, where we could maybe get 25 or 30 kids crammed into a room, and often with our virtual youth groups, we have twice or three times that many, and from all over, and teachers from other countries. So we're trying to focus on all those positive things. And then I just wanted to quickly mention a new project we started under the Whale Sighting Network called Share the Water, where we're focusing on boater education. And we've done several webinars through that program, and we'll be doing more. So just stay tuned to our Facebook page and our website. We're now that our excellent Zoomineer team has it together, we're going to be doing more of this. So we invite you to be a part of it. And also I wanted to mention that the whale calendars we were offering with our registration, and we ran out. We did get another order in, and thanks to Jill Hine, our board member and photographer and naturalist, who creates this beautiful whale calendar every year to raise funds for us. So we did get some more of those in, so you can go to our web shop if you missed out on getting one when you registered. And then I also want to just really thank everyone who was willing to pay today, even though it wasn't an in-person event, because this has always been an important fundraiser for us. And we've been hurting having to close the Whale Center this year. So that's really appreciated. And all the people who have sent in donations, either through Facebook or our web shop, you're the ones that keep us going. And thankfully, we've been able to keep all our staff employed and keep doing the good work they've been doing. But we couldn't do it without you. So thank you for coming and being a part of this.
All right,
And now
we did put the link to the Zoom happy hour in the chat a few times, so go ahead and copy that if you haven't. If you wanted to join us, we hope all of you will. So we will open that in just a few minutes and hope to see you all there. And again, thank you all so very, very much for joining us today. It was a great day, and we really appreciated having you here. Bye, everybody.
You guys did a great job. Thanks everyone for coming.